I think that ability to be really creative where it feels like what you're envisaging is not possible is actually quite inspiring for a lot of people. I personally don't have that trait. You know, I'm a bit more of a realist than that. I've really struggled on that, like dream big, dream the impossible, because I just think, oh, well, it's impossible. But I think that, and if you can inspire that to your teams, you can end up with really, really clever things that, you know, you look at and you go, wow, that product is like, someone sat down and went, how do we make this? And how do we make this amazing? No idea how we do this, but let's work on that. And I think that type of leadership can be really inspiring.
What is the key to improved productivity in any team or organisation? Could it be the 4-day work week? Could it be building trust? Could it be transparency? Could it just be great leadership? Maybe it's all of these things and more. If you want to know the answer, you're in the right place today, because this episode will be covering exactly these topics. My guest today is Richard Lee. He is a non-executive director. He's a CEO. He's an investor, product owner. He's had a career in video production, live, virtual, and hybrid events. He founded a company before COVID doing some of these things. And as you may imagine, that business exploded during the pandemic when everyone had to work from home. So remote became the way of life, became the norm. We'll be hearing about his experiences in that. We'll be hearing about his thoughts from trying things like a 4-day work week, his insights into leadership and management from before, during, and after the pandemic, and the work that he does today helping startups and other clients as well. So he's got some great knowledge here about all of these subjects, which is useful for any leader, any manager, anyone who is or aspires to be an entrepreneur and business founder too. And he's very generous sharing that experience and stories from his career so far. So stick around, don't miss it. As always, at the end of the episode, there will be some links where you can go and learn more about Richard. And of course, links to my website if you'd like to come and join us at the Integrity Leaders community.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Richard, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Great to have you on the show. Got some really interesting topics lined up today, so looking forward to it already.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. And the best place to start, I think, as always, is over to you for a little bit. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your career so far, your background, what you do today, why you do it, etc.
Cool. Yeah. I started my career about 20 years ago in media production. I worked for a video production company, left uni to get an entry-level job and rose the ranks there. I then was really interested in the technology part of video. So I always was moving more and more towards the kind of more technical stuff like sound mixing or sound recording, etc. I moved to a technology company, largely as a video producer to produce online events. So that was streaming conferences, filming and streaming conferences predominantly. I used to travel to the UK and Europe doing that. I then moved within that company. It was a relatively small startup into being responsible for more of a product role. You know, where the product was going, what the roadmap was, etc., etc. And I then decided to found my own company in 2016, largely because I felt there was a bit of a gap in the market. The company I was at was heading very much down the make this product as cheap as possible direction. I didn't really agree with that. I felt there was room for a bit more of an enterprise product. So started my own company, invested in getting the first platform built. It was a digital events technology company, so run hybrid and virtual events. So started that company, and then, yeah, I'll be honest, it started as a lifestyle business, and then it just kind of grew, I think, largely because I'm quite a like I will push myself. Does that make sense? Rather than just lay back. And then, so that business was scaled about 100% a year between 2016 and the end of 2019. We then saw hypergrowth in COVID in 2020. As you can imagine, with the type of business it was, and that was a whole experience that was really stressful. And then I exited the business at the end of 2022. I now work with startups and scale-ups and some charity boards and boards, helping them on their business journeys. So yeah, all sorts of different clients, but obviously predominantly in the tech space where I can. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting to hear, first of all, the story about your COVID experience, because I think, I mean, that particular kind of company, we don't hear a lot about companies that actually did well as a result of the pandemic. And I feel like that sector probably is one of the few that did. So, I mean, you've mentioned it was stressful. I mean, what about it made it stressful? Was it just kind of because everything exploded and everything had to grow by necessity, or was it the COVID effect? Was it a bit of everything, or?
It was a bit of everything, to be honest. I think, we'd actually put a lot of processes in place in that business. And in 2019 and late 2018, I put tons of processes in place in the business. And that was useful, but all those processes were for the business as it was, and as it was scaling into, doing 100% a year. Essentially lockdown happened and like the phone did not stop ringing. We went from maybe 5 inquiries a month, to about 10 to 15 inquiries a day. So the sales team were absolutely like full. At the same time, we were dealing with clients that had never done digital events before. So the support need was much higher than it had maybe been in the past. And we were dealing with events that were very, very, very short notice. So, for example, now if a client came to a business and said, I want to do a digital event, they're probably thinking about their event that's 6 months out. Because people were quickly moving to digital from physical, they wanted to keep the event dates the same because their attendees had those dates blotted in their calendars. So we were doing large events in like a week, 2 weeks, and we just did not have the capacity in the business to do that. And so our service fell. The workload was just insatiable. I got really stuck in with the teams that needed help. So I went and kind of worked in the production team quite significantly to help them out during this period because there was so much work. But, I alone was getting like 650 emails every day. And obviously, digital events are a very time-sensitive business. It's not like HMRC, which is why I always say you can't just go, oh, well, the queue's a year now. We'll get back to you in a year. Like the event's going to happen tomorrow at 10. So you have to do all the work by then. So I remember my partner was like, oh, well, can you just leave the emails? And I was like, well, no, because then tomorrow I'll have like 1,300 emails. And then the day after I'll have like 2,000 emails. And then where do you come back from this? But like, that's it. So yeah, it was really stressful. I think in hindsight, I should have scaled the business a lot quicker than I did. But I think like a lot of people in the Western world, we thought this was going to probably last about 3 weeks. So, by the time we scaled, we'd be done. But then even when we decided to scale the business, that was even really hard because for every job we'd advertise, we'd get like 500 applicants because everyone was looking for work. So even just sifting through applicants to make a hire felt like an impossible task. So yeah, there was quite a few challenges. And then even when we did scale the business, we had a load of staff that were totally inexperienced because it was a relatively niche sector then. You couldn't really employ people that had been doing it before. You had to try and employ similar skills. So, but obviously the workload was like continuous. So then in the summer of that year, I brought in sales restrictions on the sales team where it limited what they could sell. So they were only allowed to sell stuff that was in their current pipeline, stuff over a minimum order value. We would cap how many large scale events we do each day. So there was some more capacity in the production teams. So yeah, there were quite difficult decisions. And I think there was never, I always felt like when I was making those decisions, there was never a winner in any of the decisions. we either let some clients down, or we let existing customers down because we couldn't fulfill the work that they wanted to give us, or the sales team were annoyed because we were affecting their ability to earn commission, or the production team were annoyed because they were exhausted. I was annoyed because I was like, there was no winner in that situation. It was just degrees of loss on every decision. So yeah, like the business came out of that great, but I think there's a huge amount I do differently now. I probably focus very much around SaaS, which we were doing, but did not a huge amount of in COVID because we didn't have time to think. And I think, potentially that business could have turned into a £1 billion business like Hopin then, but it didn't. But I didn't have any strategic time to actually think. And not really any of the team in the business. There was about 10 of us at the time. We went up to about 35 and not really anybody had any time to think. So yeah, it was tricky. I learned a lot. I wouldn't want to go through it again.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? So yeah, most times, like most business owners, they hear a story of like, we had too many sales, there was too much work, and your gut instinct is like, well, that'd be a great problem to have, wouldn't it? But actually, it's interesting to hear the perspective, the insight of someone who's had that exact problem.
You know what I'd say though is, and I had this conversation about something different recently, it's a great problem is still a problem.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So like a great problem's still a problem though.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people don't really get that bit.
Yeah. I think, same about some of these old cliches, isn't it? Like the devil is still the devil, right? And the lesser evil is still an evil, and so on. Yeah.
Exactly. So, all my friends are like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I'm like, it is amazing. Oh my God, it was like whack-a-mole. Every day you didn't know what was going to hit you that day. And that was really challenging. That went on for like 18 months. And then we came out of that, and actually loads of competitors had contacted us as if they were potential clients. Well, not competitors at the time, but what became competitors, because the market was so big. Loads of new entrants came into the market, and the market became really crowded, as well as people had a bit of digital event fatigue. So we went straight from that boom into this kind of like much harder sales process. And that was the only team we didn't scale in COVID, which, in hindsight probably should have scaled that team. But then I also look back and think, well, can you imagine employing salespeople and then telling them they weren't allowed to sell? Like, what? No one would want to do that. So yeah, as I say, in hindsight, there's a lot of things I do differently. And I think that's really helpful when I help startups and scale ups now, is I can draw on some of those experiences and say, actually, do you know what? You do need to think about this. There's these other bits you need to think about, which maybe I didn't think about, and I didn't have the space to think about. And I think sometimes when you're not in the business, it's quite helpful to look into the business and give some strategic advice. And I didn't really have that at the time. So yeah, it's been helpful.
Yeah. I mean, as a counterpoint to the scaling question, I mean, I've heard a few stories now from consultants and people from like Big Four or similar size companies where they did scale up dramatically during COVID. And then as soon as it was all over, in inverted commas, they had like real issues because they had so many people. They'd expanded way beyond a sustainable business, and the work dried up or was redirected or whatever. And so mass redundancies, and that caused its own pains as well. So, there's no right answer, I suspect.
100%. That is absolutely no right answer. And I think to a certain extent, it's about riding the wave, isn't it? And knowing that what comes could be a massive fall when the wave hits. And I remember at the time actually speaking to an old business mentor who I wasn't working with at the time, being on an accelerator scheme, and that scheme had come to an end. And in 2021, he kind of said to me, yeah, this isn't like a pebble hitting a lake. This was like a massive asteroid coming into your fishing pond and totally upending it. He was like, so I understand why you're going through a lot of pain right now and why it feels absolutely exhausting and tiring, because most businesses deal with, a couple of rocks hitting their fishing pond. It was like your entire fishing pond's just been like collided by an asteroid and it's totally up in the air right now. And kind of putting it like that, I was like, yeah, actually, that would reflect exactly how I'm feeling right now. I feel exhausted and like I'm in a fight. And business can always feel like that. And I felt like that in the past, but nothing compared to this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you said, you wouldn't want to do it again, but I mean, amazing experience. I mean, all the stuff you must have learned from that. I mean, crisis management as well. I mean, that's one of those skills that I feel like a lot of people can grasp it academically, but until you actually have to do it, you don't really understand.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think people do understand. And I think, obviously the kind of very short potted story I've given you there probably doesn't do justice to how hard it was, how hard and long it was, and not knowing how long this period was going to last. None of us knew how long the period was going to last. I also think around your crisis management thing, it is quite interesting because I think people are actually quite a lot more resilient than they think they are in crises. But I think equally you can always look back, doesn't matter how good you are in the crisis, and think, well, I could have done this, could have done this, could have done this. And I think that's a natural thing to do. But actually at the time, you're just doing what you think is best. And what I also noticed was I had staff come at me a lot in that early period of COVID saying, what do you think is going to happen? How long do you think lockdown's going to happen? What do you think's happening with lockdown? And I would just remember saying, I don't know why you think I know any more than you. Like, the Chancellor is not directly contacting me with information just because I've run a business. I know probably the same as you, maybe slightly less, because I get to see the news less than you because the workload is so crazy. But it's just interesting how people instantly go to people that are more senior than them, thinking they must have all the answers. Richard must know. He's my manager. He must know everything. And when you're at the top of that organisation, you're sitting there thinking, okay, so who am I going to ask? When will lockdown finish? Can you tell me, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think that speaks to like the responsibility of leadership, though, doesn't it? Because in those trying times when those crisis moments happen, rightly or wrongly, and whether you've got the answers or not, if you're in a leadership position, people will look to you. They will ask you. They'll come to rely on you even. And it's an interesting one. And it creates that whole extra layer of stress, doesn't it? Because you, as you just described, like you feel this pressure to, well, am I supposed to know the answer? What do I do? And it, doubles all the stress.
I think that was even more tricky in COVID because obviously there was no real basis to go on before. I think, staff can often come to you with personal issues or bits and pieces, and you can often draw on maybe similar experiences or like experiences to give more practical help or advice or leadership. Whereas I think COVID was, that once in 100-year thing where there was nothing for me to draw on. I just kept thinking more in the West, like, we're not going to go on a lockdown. Remember, like, I had member stuff in the January that year. He was absolutely obsessed with COVID when it was kicking off in China. It's like, this is going to be the start of us. Like, oh, you watch, this is going to be crazy. And everyone, including myself in the office, was looking at him thinking, yeah, you've lost the plot, mate. Like, no, I don't think so. Like, I remember we went and got a COVID test at like the 20th of January or something because he'd been to London, he had the sniffles. And like rang me from the GP and was like, I've been sent for a COVID test. I'm not allowed to see anyone. And I was like, you're getting a COVID test? He said, I've been to London. I've got the sniffles. I was like, oh, right. I was like, I wouldn't have even thought to go to the GP with the sniffles. He didn't have COVID, by the way. But you get how obsessed he was about the COVID situation.
But he could have. He could have had it. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's not get into the politics of it, but I think there wasn't sufficient communication. I think from the top.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you. I think, but what I always say is, and I'm absolutely no fan of the leaders we had at the time. I don't believe they were trying to do the worst, and having went through quite a hard experience in that period. It's really hard to make good decisions when you don't know what's coming and you don't have anything to base this on. And, I do look at the leaders and think, they had the economy, people's lives, like the health. There was a lot of balancing things there. And like I said about my business, it's like there's no good option. They're all just degrees of really bad decisions.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to make the best bad decision, but ultimately they're all rubbish. You know, you're not sitting there going, yeah, this is the option here. There's no pain here. This is all win. You're just looking at a degree of loss somewhere with your decision. And that is a hard place to be for anyone, you know, business leader, political leader, anyone. It's really hard when all the options in front of you are basically rubbish.
Yeah, no, I can't disagree with that. And you're right, of course, and it's easy in hindsight, isn't it? And even at the time, like, it's quite easy to throw stones at people in those positions. I think it just comes down to a question of, like, the priorities and the values, doesn't it? And whether you feel like the leadership is acting in alignment with yours or not.
Yeah, I agree.
And yes, anyway, best leave that one. Let's.
I just thought it was interesting because there's definitely some similarity there between
there
are
and
on
there
a
are
much
lessons.
different scale, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are big lessons there about, well, leadership and crisis management, aren't there? And I think for me, the biggest one of those, as I hinted at earlier, is the communication. And yeah, but let's not politicize it, but I do feel like there was less honesty and transparency than there might have been, at least in this country.
Yes, I'd agree.
Right, so going back then right to the beginning of your career and the video production thing and that passion you had at the beginning, I mean, what was the goal at the time? Like, where did you see that taking your career? And
yeah, I really wanted to work doing live TV. I've always been really attracted to live stuff. I don't know what it is, call us crazy. I really like that. Lots of plates spinning at the same time and making something that you look at and you can see this tangible thing at the end of it. So the production company I was working at didn't do any live stuff at all. Predominantly we did TV commercials and corporate videos, the odd TV program, but they were like of a documentary nature. I didn't really love doing TV commercials. I felt a little bit like selling your soul. There's a lot of red tape comes with TV commercials. So in the UK, there's a compliance body called Clearcast, where everything that is shown on TV or said on TV goes through them for legal compliance. And, you know, you get all of these like tiny little legal captions that you need to put on that have to be on for a certain amount of time. So quite a lot of the job was arguing, and that wasn't particularly great. I seem to be quite good at it, so I seem to get stuck with doing a lot of it for a lot of the projects. But, you know, ultimately you're stuck between a client saying, I want to say this is the best sale ever and we're the cheapest sofa company ever, and a regulator who's basically saying, well, you can't evidence that at all. There's no evidence to say you're the best sofa company ever and you're the cheapest sofa company ever. And so what you then end up with is like this argument that you're in the middle of and trying to find something that works for both sides, a bit of a mediator role, I guess. And it's satisfying when you have a win over the regulator, but most of the time it's just dull. And it adds quite a lot of stress to the process because the regulator work to their own timeline. So you're obviously making a TV commercial for 9 o'clock on Tuesday, and you maybe submit your script 2 months ahead of that, but they might not look at your script for like 2 weeks. And in that period, you need to also be filming your commercial and editing it and et cetera, et cetera. So what you just seem to always end up with is this Friday night hell where the regulator finally goes, oh my God, it's on air on Monday, or it's on air over the weekend. I have to deal with this today. And then they go, okay, well, you can't say that. You can't say this. You can't say this. And then you get new voiceovers done. You were re-editing the commercial. You had to like send it electronically to the broadcaster rather than on tape because we used tape back then. And you're just constantly working late all the time. And it was just really irritating. But the bits of the job I did really like was going out and meeting people. So when you used to go out and film interviews for corporate videos, I really liked that. They were much smaller crews. You were a bit more multi-skilled on those jobs because they were a smaller crew. I really liked learning about different industries and going to different places and learn about different people's jobs and you know what they do and what their challenges are. And I think that was quite interesting for me because, I'd speak to friends and they didn't really have that variety in their jobs. They just always spoke to the same type of person or the same client or whatever. Whereas actually it was quite nice going and learning about lots of different things. So I have my general knowledge is terrible, but I have relatively decent knowledge on some very specific niches because I've dealt with them quite a bit. But yeah, ultimately that company went through some changes. It was right in the financial crisis. I joined there in 2006. So they had a tricky couple of years and that business was just going off in a direction that I couldn't really align to anymore. And, it was kind of empire building. They wanted to become a communications agency. They were, developing a website arm and all these other parts of the company. And the company was just not very stable, cash flow wise. Like you could see that our suppliers didn't get paid promptly. And it was quite chaotic inside the company sometimes. So I opted to move, and I saw this opportunity that was working around live. Obviously it wasn't in TV, but, you were filming and streaming a conference. There's quite a lot of similarities to it, filming stuff, multi-camera, vision mixing it live, streaming and audio mixing, etc. So moved to that and that kind of fulfilled that passion and that need. And I think, definitely it can be really stressful when you're on site on a really busy webcast with very few people, but it can be quite rewarding sometimes. And I think working in that sector was quite useful because I ended up working with quite a lot of clients on the content and the way they structured their conferences and their events. Because I'd been a producer in video production beforehand, I maybe had a slightly different view. And I wasn't just a technician, I wasn't just there to press buttons. I could add that extra little piece of, well, if you did this, you might get the message across better. What's the aims of the conference and really work with clients to get the best out of things. So that's where I started and that was the aim. Still not working in TV production now. Don't think that'll ever happen. And to be honest, lots of what I see, I'm not even sure I'd want to work in it. But there is that bit around working in live broadcasting and the challenges that throw up that I like and that excites me.
Yeah. So we're not going to see you on the news anytime soon then, is what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting time to be doing it as well, because I guess it was probably predated streaming, didn't it? I'm trying to think when that actually happened. It seems like it's been around forever now, doesn't it? But
yeah. I mean, I moved to that company in 2011 that was streaming conferences and it was niche then. If you wanted a freelancer that could vision mix and stream a conference, that they just didn't really exist. It was hard. So as we were expanding that team, we needed to again get people in-house and train them, using like-minded video skills, but then training them on the IT aspects of streaming. And, lots of clients were really nervous and had never streamed an event before. And also back in 2011, internet access, not what it is now. There was a whole piece around making sure you had good enough internet access at a venue so that you could stream content. Most internet speeds are fast download, slow upload. For streaming, you need fast upload. Now, if I wanted to stream a conference, it would just be expected. I'd obviously check beforehand we could get internet access, but I wouldn't really be concerned about it. Whereas I remember in 2011, there was a lot of discussion over some venues just could not support that, so that clients couldn't do their conference there if they wanted to stream as well. It was definitely niche. And I would say even up to 2019, streaming conferences and events were small. Not that many people were doing it. And then all of a sudden in 2020, everybody was doing it.
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting study, I think, and similar parallel to the Zoom and Teams and all that kind of wave, I suppose, that came out of COVID is the technology was there, the internet maybe a bit shaky in some places, but the tools existed. Zoom was around for at least 5, probably 10 years before COVID hit, for example. And yet it took that massive crisis, that necessity, before businesses fully embraced it. And when you think about it, I mean, all of the costs that could have been saved, all those like flights to conferences or like going across the world to meet a customer. And yes, I mean, we can talk about the value of face to face and shaking people's hands and looking them in the eye, as all the old school bosses used to say. But I do feel like a lot of the time that wasn't necessary. Like, you didn't have to be doing that every single meeting. You didn't have to hop on the plane every single time. And then the climate impact of all of that as well. That was another thing that I found really interesting during COVID, was watching all the emissions figures. And they reckoned like we'd set climate change back a couple of years just during all the lockdowns, which we've now destroyed again since, but still, like.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I remember my partner used to say to me, I cannot believe a client will fly you to Asia or to San Francisco to stream an event. It's so wasteful. Why can they not get someone local? And I always used to say, well, A, it's about using who you trust. B, doing this. Like, there's a lot that can go wrong in streaming. And actually, if you don't have experience of doing it, it can go wrong really quickly. And when you got like 10,000 people at the other end watching, that can be career suicide for that event manager, but also brand suicide for that brand. On your point around the fly and stuff, I think there's space for both. I think what I saw in COVID, I used to go and stream a conference for a large banking technology customer every year. Had about 2,000 physical attendees there every year. You used to all fly in from across the globe to somewhere in Europe to a like massive convention hotel centre. Cost absolute fortune. They moved their event online at April 2020 because obviously physical event could not happen, especially one that had people fly in everywhere. And they got like 6,500 people attend that event for a huge amount less cost. And they were instantly, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, the data we're getting from this is crazy. I can see how long people watched. I can see what they watched. I can see where they dropped off. We don't get any of this from our physical event, and we pay an absolute shed ton more money. But you do lose out on that networking piece. However, what I would also counter that is it's really hard networking at an event to meet the right person, especially if there's 2,000 people there. You tend to end up speaking to people you already know, or people that you either are sitting next to while you're eating, sitting next to in a conference hall, or standing next to while you're getting a cup of tea. And seldom out of 2,000 people is that likely to be the person that is exactly who you need and who they need to connect with at that exact moment. It's probably just two random people, which is essentially what it is. So I think there's something around that for physical events that doesn't really work. And I know there's some technology tools, like the company I used to have has got a technology tool around that now to match people together based on needs and interests for physical and digital events. But the appetite in the market is really small for that stuff. And so I think everyone says networking is really important. And I agree, it is really important. If you get the right person at an event, that can be a gold mine of a client or a customer or someone to push you on in your business or you to push them on in their business. And you can get a really great relationship going there. But how do you find that person? It's just absolute luck. And I think that's the hard bit, especially with big events. And you, equally, it's easier to network the room when it's an event of 40 people. But what's the chance, unless they're all very similar, that they're going to be the right person for you still in that 40 people? So kind of like you do need 2,000 people because it gives you more chance of getting the right person. But finding the person in that 2,000 people is really hard. So I do think there's room for both.
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably agree with you, although I have to say, personal preference for me, it's online all the way. And I think, yeah, I mean, you're right. It's relying on that random chance, isn't it? And you know, you can have nice conversations, you meet interesting people, but whether they're the sort of people you need to meet for what you're trying to do with your business or whatever.
And that's it. It's like, is it a nice conversation or is it a productive, useful conversation that's going to do something for you and your business, or you do something for them and their business? Because there's loads of nice conversations.
Exactly.
But actually, they're a bit worthless, aren't they? You don't often get that deep into the conversation where it's of meaning. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Possibly. I think it's probably true of both, isn't it? But I think with the physical, the in person, it's a lot more of an investment to be there in the first place. So the stakes are higher, and it's harder to overlook that, isn't it? Whereas with online, like, it's a lot cheaper. It's taken far less time out of my day. It's way more convenient. If I have a few interesting conversations as a result and nothing comes with it, that's fine by me because it's not cost me much.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, though. So, I mean, something else that we've talked about before that I think we need to talk about whilst being recorded, because it's a really interesting subject, is this 4-day work week concept. So it's been in the news recently. It comes up a couple of times a year, doesn't it? And there's entire countries now, I think, that are trialing it. I can't remember which one. It's one of the Scandinavian countries, possibly Sweden. Can't remember. Anyway, I'll look that up afterwards. And I know you've had experience of that. You've rolled it out in a business, I believe, and then some of your clients are doing it now as well.
Yeah, so I'm in. I rolled it out in the business I had. Took that decision while we were kind of doing some restructuring. I took it with HR, like our strategic lead for HR. My view was we shouldn't not do it while we were restructuring. I think, for me, it felt like a great thing to do for people. It also felt like I was already doing a 4-day week, and I had started doing a 4-day week in 2019. Obviously, that went on hiatus in COVID because, I was already pretty productive, but still getting 650 emails every day. So that didn't really like the 4 days, but I did go back to the 4-day week in 2021. And my view was actually, I think we could all do this in the business if we worked a bit smarter. So we did some work around, what meetings could be cut out. How could we get technology to do things that we were doing manually? So that was like some investment in our technology platform. That was using some automations in our CRM. And we went to 4.5 days first, before getting towards 4. So that meant everyone just need to make like a 10% productivity bump rather than a 20% one in one go. And different people managed that at different paces. Some people managed it straight away and other people didn't. And working out where the problems were was tricky. We had some other stuff going on in the company at the same time, which I think made some people look very unproductive. But actually, what was happening was they were getting dumped with quite a lot of extra client amends from some members of the team, which weren't shown on paper in revenue wise. So it looked like we were selling less, but had tons more people. But actually we just had this issue going on that we weren't really aware of, which I kind of took me a little while to uncover. Just like gradually scraping the surface of where the problem was. And then it was like, oh, the problem's not over here. Actually, the problem's here. It just manifested in this person looking unproductive. But I'm also involved in a charity called Citizens Advice Gateshead, one of the largest citizens advice organisations in the country. They've got about 260 staff now. They deliver some national contracts. They've got a community interest company that delivers contracts outside Gateshead as well. So that is about 7 million turnover now, grown by about 1 million turnover a year. I've been involved in that about 2.5 years now. And they rolled out the 4-day week as I was joining. They'd already made the decision, but obviously worked with them on that. And they did it by team, because obviously they're quite large. So teams moved to 4-day week separately, and they have what they call a productivity agreement. So the agreement is 100% productivity for 100% pay, but for 80% hours. And they have quite a lot of metrics in their organization already. They're seeing people giving social welfare advice, they're doing phone calls, etc. So they could measure how many clients they were seeing and what the impacts were quite well per person. So it was about work and how they do that. So, it was like unnecessary meetings. What can we use technology wise to make improvements? The biggest thing they struggled with was and they've managed it nonetheless, was the call centre staff. They've got a call centre that delivers some government contracts for national advice, and call centre staff and the way call centres work is that they're quite targeted anyway on productivity. So, each call needs to be, 8 minutes, say, you need to be doing X number of calls a day, blah, blah, blah. And because you're measured on calls, it's much harder if you cut out 20% of their time for that productivity to stay high, because they're kind of judged on calls rather than on output. Whereas lots of roles that work really well for the 4-day week are judged on outputs, not on time. Whereas call centre, it's very much based on calls. So all you can really do is speed up the calls, get through that advice quicker. But they were already quite short calls for the level of advice they were given. So they did manage that, but that was the team that I think everyone was most concerned about, myself included, because I just, there's certain roles that is really hard for 4-day week. A receptionist, how do you make a receptionist more productive? Well, you can't really, can you? Because ultimately they need to be there between 9 and 5 to man the reception.
Yeah.
It's really hard and tricky sometimes. But I guess what you have to look at is the overall productivity of the organisation, even if some individual roles are a presenteeism type role. And I hate that word. I hate presenteeism. But ultimately, some roles in organisations are presenteeism, like receptionists. You just got to be there to answer the phone. End of. Or to see a person as they walk in the door that needs help. Which, in the instance of this charity, that's what it is. They need to just be there so that there's someone to say, hi, what do you need if someone walks in and they're homeless or they're in crisis? Or you can't go, oh, well, on a Friday, you have to speak to a machine when you walk in. It's just not going to be the same. Even though I advocate technology all the time, it's not the same. So yeah, it is, but in that organisation, it is working really well. Really, really well. Yeah. And they review it every 12 months, as part of the appraisal process. So no one's been taken off it, I don't believe. But obviously I have a board level role there, so I'm not super close to it. But it's that, and you're not forced to do it. So some staff say, I don't want to do it. It's too much pressure. I don't want to do it. You just want to stay on 5 days.
That's interesting.
So yeah, it's kind of an individual thing. But it's working really well.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Of course, there's always going to be some roles, some industries where that won't work. I don't know. If it's just answering the phone though, I feel like that could be addressed. Like you could have job sharing, or you could offset days so one person's there at some point. There's ways around that.
But that's not making it more productive, is it?
True.
And I guess the point of the 4-day week is 100% productivity, 80% time.
Yeah, but for the individual though, it could be. It's just a different individual doing it that day.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
But the physical walk-in, that's not so easy, is it? You could, I suppose, do a similar thing. But
there's definitely ways around it. I think it's just that ultimately then means you've got to add more cost in the organisation, doesn't it? Because you've got to have, you basically put an extra 20% on that role because you need it to be staffed round the clock, because you can't judge them as much on output. And I think, for me, I always try to judge in a business on output rather than on time. So, if you can get through your work in 4 hours, great. Like, you shouldn't need to be there 8 hours. But it is hard with some roles. Mm-hmm. Like, when it is a presenteeism role where you've just got to be there, and it's fine to say, like, a receptionist, for example, can be sitting there and not have any work to do. Because it's variable demand, isn't it? And I'm not saying you have 10 receptionists sitting there on a lunchtime when no one's walking in. But when you're down to one receptionist anyway, there's a limit to how much more you can do when you need to have that.
Absolutely. And I think that's why a lot of companies kind of mix that role with other things like office manager and stuff like that, because they want to get that full productivity out of that person. They can't possibly be sitting there just waiting for the phone to ring. That's, I don't know, mixed feelings about that approach as well, to be fair.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think 4-day week is definitely something, if people are listening and they want to try it in their organisation, like, feel free to reach out to me. There's a 4-day week foundation as well, which has loads of tips and advice. I personally am a massive believer in it. And I think for me, like we said before, it's 100% productivity, 80% effort, 100% pay. 4-day week is not just getting people to condense their hours into 4 days, because ultimately they're still just working 40 hours or whatever hours they work. So I think there's a distinction there. Lots of people say, oh, we offer 4-day week, but actually what they mean is they allow you to do 4 10-hour days. And that's not the same as what 4-day week foundation would say is, literally you're cutting out a fifth of your week in time, but you're keeping your productivity high.
Yeah. I mean, it's that definition of productivity, isn't it? As we've discussed previously, but it's like, I mean, extra hours definitely isn't the way forward. But I mean, I think this is especially true for office jobs, which is where I've spent the majority of my career. Like, at least 20% of any given workday, you're not being productive. Like, excluding lunch hours and breaks and the legal mandatory stuff, you're talking rubbish with people at the desk. You're in the kitchen shooting the proverbial.
COVID and that move to hybrid working. I mean, I've personally been on hybrid working for ages, way before COVID, and the company I had was hybrid working all the way. But I think it has meant that 4-day week thing is more achievable now, because, like you say, people can kind of get their head down in isolation if that's what works for them, and just have like a couple of days a week of powering through work. And maybe another couple of days a week in the office where they're being more collaborative, and the aims of those days are different, and so that has opened up the opportunity, I think, to increase productivity, as well as your commute time is saved. Like, there's a lot of stuff there that I think hybrid working really opens the door on productivity savings quite a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the commute one is an interesting one too. I mean, I think during the COVID years, as a result, and the remote work and hybrid as well, again, speaking to the office kind of jobs, I know it's not the same in other industries. I think on the whole, productivity increased dramatically, especially whilst COVID was still a thing, because people were feeling that pressure. They were worried about losing their jobs, so they were working way more hours at home than they ever would have in the office. They probably spent a lot less time in those pointless meetings that everyone spends half their life in.
What I always said in COVID was, in the UK certainly, the economy went down by 20%, but half the people were on furlough.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was like, well, how come it hasn't gone down by half? Surely should have went down by half. Half the people are off work on furlough.
Yeah. I wonder how much of that is because people were working more, and they were so the commuting hours as well, they were just working those instead of sitting on the motorway or on the tube or whatever. But then also how much of it was down to furlough fraud.
Yeah, potentially. I just found it really interesting. I remember when the stats came out, speaking to a colleague, and I was like, it's really bizarre, isn't it? 10 million people on furlough, that's half the workforce, yet the economy's went down by about 20%. It's like, it should have went down by about half.
Yeah, it doesn't add up, does it? I mean, I heard stories. There were definitely people who were claiming it and carrying on working.
Oh, yeah, I think there's tons of people doing that.
A lot of people. I mean, what was the figure? They wrote it off, didn't they? The fraud HMRC it was in the billions, wasn't it? I can't remember how much.
Oh, yeah.
Ridiculous. Anyway, we're veering to politics again. Meetings came up there, though, didn't it? So, meeting culture. What are your thoughts on that, and how did they change from the pandemic?
I feel like, for me, I'm not sure meetings changed that much from the pandemic, because I feel like we were quite targeted around our meetings anyway. I think what I noticed with clients in that business, to be honest, I would actually say that I felt like meetings increased after the pandemic. And I don't know if that's because it's easier to have a meeting now than before, and therefore some people are very conditioned into filling their day into meetings. And I think part of that is, again, presenteeism, where people feel like if their calendar's full, they're working hard. And that's not always necessarily the case. So I think meetings are a interesting one. I think it's cultural, depending on the business you're working in, to be honest, rather than the pandemic. I think the pandemic definitely opened up the opportunity to make meetings easier, but I also think that potentially means that some people do more of them. However, I think what's more exciting for meetings now is the use of AI, which isn't a pandemic thing, but is much more recent in terms of like transcripts and that auto summarizing of meetings. And I know in Teams you can join late and it can give you a summary of what's been discussed in the meeting so far. And I think actually that is probably what's going to make meetings and that meeting culture much, much more productive. Because if you can get a summary of a meeting instantaneously and not attend the meeting, actually that's an hour saved that you don't need to do. And actually a lot of people attend meetings just because they need to hear what's going on, not because they need to contribute too much in them. And actually, if that can be done as something you can read in 5 minutes instead of attending a meeting for an hour or two, that is a game changer in my view.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's like the mild big brother aspect of it as well. Like if you know your meeting's being transcribed and summarized, like you feel a pressure there to make sure it's productive and not just a complete waste of time in a talking shop. Because everyone will know. They'll have the transcript like, well, they didn't discuss anything. Like, there's no outcome from this. What was the point?
But I also think it can trigger, I think sometimes in meetings there can be really useful discussions that get forgotten because most people remember what happened at the end of the meeting.
True.
And therefore you end up having another meeting to discuss the bit that was in the middle because it's forgotten about. Actually, if you've got that written, you kind of can negate that second meeting sometimes. Because you've got the whole thing, whereas people's minds are much more focused around what happened at the end than what happened in the middle.
Yeah.
So I think there's quite a lot of productivity gains from that.
Yeah, I can see that 100%. I mean, thankfully, I don't have to go to a lot of meetings these days unless I choose to. But back in the day, like I don't know if I just had like a way better memory than anyone else in the room. I don't think so. I feel like that's a bit arrogant to say that, but almost every meeting I sat in, you'd get to a point like 15, 20 minutes in, you're like, well, we talked about this last time. Why are we doing this again? Like, has everyone else forgotten that we talked about this last time? Or is that just not really why we're here? We're just here for the presenteeism and the...
Oh, actually, David, you missed the last meeting. So we're going to spend half of this meeting recapping what we did last time.
Yeah.
Because one person wasn't here and everyone else is sitting there. The other 20 people are sitting there going... Yeah, but we covered all of this last time.
Is that not what like the follow-up email was for after the last meeting? But also, like the couple of times that happened as well, they did exactly that, and it was word for word. That was the phrase, and then they proceed to recount the last meeting, which was exactly the same as the meeting before that, which I hadn't missed. So it's like, very frustrating meeting culture, I find. And you're so right. It's the culture of the organisation, isn't it? I think some companies do it a lot better than others.
Yeah, I would also say what I noticed in COVID in my organisation, which kind of linked to this productivity piece around meeting culture, is the use of chat. And I think in an office, you don't necessarily walk straight up to someone because you have a problem, because you can see they're on a call, they're busy, whatever, they're stressed out, whereas it's much easier for someone to sit at home to message someone else sitting at home with a chat message. And I felt like my level of incoming communication in COVID absolutely exploded with chats. You know, suddenly there was we had loads of group chats for each team. We had people messaging individually. And I think I heard that from quite a lot of staff as well, that it was a massive distraction and actually quite stressful because unlike emails, you can't just leave them kind of marked as starred or flagged as to do. As soon as you've clicked into them, they're gone. So if there's task in there, you've forgotten it. So actually, I think chats as well as meetings is cultural in a business as well, as to how they're used and how widespread they're used and what they're used for. And actually, I think if they are overused, I think that can be really damaging to productivity because people basically spend all their day just answering chats. And nobody will solve anything for themselves because it's easy to ask someone else.
Yeah, I've rarely seen that used productively, if ever, actually. And again, like pre-COVID, we had things like Slack, and I mean, Teams originally wasn't video conferencing at all, was it? It was like the competitor to Slack. And we did, we had it, and most people wouldn't use it. And if they did, it was just to talk about rubbish. There was never any serious professional stuff in there because that's what email was for. And then you're like, well, what's the point of this? Why do we have it? If all we might as well just text each other or WhatsApp or whatever. This is not a business tool. Anyway, I'm probably biased by experience there.
Yeah, I think it is just very linked though, because for me, I try to explode in our organisation, and there's some good parts of that, but some negatives as well. And I think it does need to be thought through as part of our culture piece in the business.
Oh, definitely. Because I mean, I see the value in that ability to like the instant communication, but it's how you use it and how you maintain that without it going off the rails and just becoming an irrelevance, or as you said, creating another source of stress in the many different feeds of data and things that everyone has to deal with in this day and age. Yeah, it is a challenge, that one, definitely. I don't know what the answer is, though.
If you come off a conference call and you've got 20 chat messages from different staff members, in an office, if someone could see you on a conference call, they would not form a queue of 20 people to stand at your desk to speak to you.
I mean, they might. It's not unheard of.
I mean, they may or may not. But you know what I mean? Like, it's unlikely that, because they'd be like, oh, God, clearly, like, they're pretty stressed right now. Whereas you can't see that with chat messages. So they just keep appearing.
Yeah. It's a tough one. I don't know what the right answer to that is, if there is one. But problem for another day, maybe. Right, so I've just glanced at the time. We must be having fun. So what would be then, from all your experiences so far, what would be your best piece of advice for any entrepreneurs or aspiring founders in the audience?
Yeah, I think really try and know your customer. Try and take in feedback from your customer on a regular basis and find a way of getting that feedback regularly. I think really focus on your company culture from the start. I think it's really key. And I think just because you've done your values and your mission and your vision, don't be afraid to revisit them regularly, especially if your staff population is transient or you're growing and you're getting new members of staff in. I think that always needs to be continuously hammered home. And I think nobody likes being dictated to. So probably doing something like a values workshop once a year with all staff, if you can, depending on how large your organisation is, and reassessing if those values are still fit for purpose or not. I think what you should probably find is that you'd be recruiting around values, so those values should be still fit for purpose. But what you'll find is that people will come up with a whole load of new values, but they're really just the same values with different words. And so you can kind of do a whole workshop on, well, actually, is this really the same as this value we already have? Because I think people feel like they need to come up with something new, but actually what they're seeing is the same. But I think it really ignites that values piece in the organisation, and continually doing stuff around values I think is really important. And being transparent about what your values are with your clients, and also not being afraid to call out clients sometimes if they don't match your values. Like one of the values we had in my business was respect, and we felt sometimes we weren't getting respect from clients and they were just treating us a bit like second-class citizens. And actually, that isn't good for your organisation. It ruins morale in your organisation. And actually, it's sometimes okay to say, I don't think we're a fit here, or call them out on that and say, we can't work like this anymore. You need to be really brave to do that, but I think it can be really beneficial, because actually having a bad client in that mix can really disrupt the entire organisation and therefore can affect other clients, which I think's something you only really learn from seeing and doing. At the start when you're a founder, you just think any money's money. So any client's a client, just take everything. But actually taking clients that fit is really important, not just any client. I'd also say, as you're growing, keeping notes and journaling. So I found, and not journaling in the kind of traditional sense, but, working out what your goals are for the next few months, breaking them down into manageable chunks, and try and reflect every day and at the end of every week, what have I done today or this week to move forward on those goals? Because if not, you can just get stuck where actually you're not making enough progress. You feel like you are, but actually you're not really making enough progress, and therefore you can stutter. So I think that's really important, and making space to think strategically, I think, is super important, and is not, certainly I didn't do that enough in the pandemic when the business exploded. But I think that's strategic thinking. Or if you're not a strategic thinker as an entrepreneur or a founder, ensuring you have someone in your business or you're working with, or a mentor or a coach, that can have that space to think strategically about your business, and taking on that advice and listening to it and using it effectively, I think is probably the best advice I could give someone.
I mean, that's a long and really useful list, actually. Thank you. Most people have like one or two things, but I mean, yeah, that was really good. I think, like, totally agree with you on the values and the culture. I think those two things go hand in hand if you do it right. I think I really like those organizations where they involve the people working there in those conversations as well, particularly when you're first starting out, because it's quite easy as a founder, as a CEO, just say, right, this is the values of the organization, I have spoken, and that's that, and you just expect everyone to live up to it. But if you've already got part of a team around you before you've started to think about or define those, I mean, those people are that culture, are those values as much as you are at that point. And I think recognizing that and having it be more of a conversation towards a shared values, a shared culture, I think makes it more survivable in the long term.
I agree, and I think that's why it's really important that you revisit that kind of values workshop as you get new starters for whatever reason, whether that's, natural wastage that you're replacing, or whether that's growth, because I think then those new starters feel like those values are theirs, they've had input in them. And I think across all parts of business, and motivating staff and leading staff now, is actually, if they feel like they're part of what you're doing, they're going to work harder and more effectively. And, that kind of old management style of you'll do as you're told doesn't really work anymore now. And I think that's a similar thing. You come into an organization, it's like, these are our values, this is what we do here. That's fine. But then if they're, within a few months of them starting, or 6 months of them starting, they're going through a workshop where they feel like they've also contributed to those values, even if the values haven't even changed. Because like we said, they're probably just going to, if you've recruited on values, they're going to have similar values anyway. And they're probably just going to call stuff slightly different words. Do you know what I mean? Or phrase it in a slightly different way. But they'll still feel like, oh, actually what I said does relate to the bigger value here. So actually, it really brings that piece together, I think, for people. It's super valuable. Absolutely,
yeah. And I think the other thing is like walking the talk as well, making sure you're living those values yourself. And I think one thing I've never seen it done, but I've heard about it, and I can see how powerful it would be, is giving people license to call you out as well if you're the leader. Like, if everyone, if you think I've missed the mark on one of these values, I want you to tell me. And that takes a certain courage, I think. It's probably why I haven't seen anyone do it in practice. But
yeah, it's really hard, I think, when you're a leader, because sometimes you're having to make decisions that, I don't want to say don't align with the values, but when you've basically got two really bad options in front of you and they're the only options, and one goes against one value and one goes against another value, it's really hard to make a decision. It's much easier if one sits really well with your company values and the other one doesn't. But actually, sometimes life's not as simple as that.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think what we also did was 360 reviews. And I found that really useful. And those reviews we had very much around the values. So of our core values, the 360 appraisal process would have people rate the other person based on each value and provide some feedback. And then we did stop, start, and continue as bits of feedback. And I also went through that same process where staff members did a 360 on me, as well as being part of that process on other staff members. So I think, it gives you some useful things to realize yourself, where you're not with, holding up to the values. And we all need a rain check, don't we? Sometimes, stuff gets in the way, you end up going down a specific path because of X, Y, and Z's happened in the business. And then you need that refresher, which can come from members of staff to say, do you know what, actually, yeah, you're right. Why are we acting this way? Why are we being so harsh on clients? Why are we doing this? Because this doesn't align with what we are or what we want to be. We've done it for this reason. So how can we solve that problem a different way? So yeah, I agree with you. Like, as the leader, taking on that feedback's really important as well.
Yeah. And I think, that 360 is one way of doing it. But I think when you're in those situations where you've got only two options, let's say, and each of them conflicts with a different value, it's being transparent with people about the decision afterwards. Like this, yes, I know it goes against that value. However, the other option was this, which would have been worse because it went against this value that's higher priority for us, or whatever the thought process was. Where the danger is that you just kind of sweep it under the carpet and hope nobody notices, because they will notice.
And I think being transparent in the organisation is really valuable across everything. So, letting people know what decisions are being made, why they're being made. I think, even if you're sitting in a management team, other members of staff can be thinking, oh my God, what they're talking about in there. And I think just because you're sitting in a management team doesn't mean other people aren't know what's being discussed. So I would always be quite open with people if they asked me what was happening. I think it's really important. Obviously there's certain elements of things that you can't always share amongst the entire team in the business, but unless there's an absolute reason for that, I see absolutely no reason why people shouldn't know what's going on, because actually they know that you're then a human like them, you're relatable, and you're making decisions based on values and why you're making the decisions. And actually, most of the time, if people know why the decision's being made, they're fine with whatever the decision is. It's when a decision that they don't like is bestowed upon them and they have no reference as to why, that you start getting people disenfranchised and, unmotivated.
Absolutely. And it's trust building, isn't it? It's respect building. And it's exactly as you say. It's like the risk is people will find out something anyway. It might not be 100% correct. And it will lead them down that negative path. But it will also make them question, like, why didn't I hear this from you? And so it's much better in my experience. Just be transparent, be as honest as you can.
And like as a leader and your management team that are also leaders, letting them be transparent with their teams is just so important. Like that first business I worked in, we didn't get paid one month because cash flow was so bad and the MD was in Florida. And we found out from the accountant we weren't going to get paid. And I just look at that and think, I can't even believe that happened now. Like, if that was my organisation, I'd be like flying home to try and steady the ship and be truly transparent and honest about what was going on.
Yeah, that's bad.
And I think, shit happens in business, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like, there could be times where cash flow is really tight for whatever reason, but actually being honest with people in the lead up to that, actually, this is happening. It's an absolute hiatus this month because of X, Y, Z. This isn't a repeating thing, whatever makes people go, okay, don't panic. But actually just hearing it on the grapevine makes people just go in an absolute frenzy of panic. It's so important.
Yeah. Right, so conscious of time, I've got a couple more questions for you, if you're okay time-wise. This one, I have to ask everyone, really. Well, I don't have to, but I do, because I really enjoy the answers. And it's, what would you say has been your best experience being led?
I think being allowed enough autonomy to make mistakes while receiving enough support to ensure I could develop at the same time. And I think there's a bit of a fine line, isn't there, on, allowing people to make mistakes that are not too damaging, but you can learn a lot from a mistake. And I think giving people enough autonomy to make decisions without constantly needing everything to go through a manager, I think is really important. So I'd say they're the best instances of being led for me. And it's not even to say that same person that's leading me would be like that all the time, but there's pockets of that type of leadership that really works.
There's a school of thought that says the bigger the mistake, the more there is to learn. But
100%.
But I understand why a business might not want to go that route.
It's really hard. It's really hard to know whether to let someone make a mistake or not. and what the repercussions of that will be. But sometimes, like you say, you learn a lot through mistakes. I remember I had a member of staff years ago, and he was learning how to do live streaming, had been learning for about a year, was relatively junior at the time. And I remember we did an event abroad. We flew back to Heathrow and then we're flying back to Newcastle, and he got off at Heathrow to go and do an event by himself, which was a really simple event. And I remember the freelancer I was with went, "Do you think he's up to it?" And I was like, "I think he is up to it." I was like, "But I think he could well cook it up, largely because I think he's a little bit laid back." I was like, "But I tell you what, if he does, he'll never do it again." I was like, because he'll want to die in front of that client if that happens. If that event goes wrong and you're sitting with that uncomfortableness in front of a client, you'll never do that again. And he did manage to cook it up, largely because he was a bit too laid back. And I tell you, he's fantastic now. Like, he's like director of content at a company now. But I, firmly believe that making that mistake, there was a huge improvement in that member of staff very, very quickly afterwards. Like, much bigger improvement than would have happened had I been coaching him. Because I think some people, sometimes you don't get it until you're in it. You don't get what someone's saying to you. You don't get how serious the situation can be because you're sheltered from it until you're in it. And then you go, "Oh my God, I never want this to happen to me ever again." It's so awful. Like, so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's having that personal stake in it, isn't it? You're right. And I think that's why a lot of like training courses and things don't take either, because, it's quite abstract and people don't always relate it to their actual experience and until it happens to them. It's an interesting aspect of human nature, that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, last question for you. This one's usually my favorite one, though. You might hate it, but we're going to do it anyway. It's called Leadership Heroes.
Leadership Heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, that could be anyone you can think of. So they could be alive, dead, past or present, real or fictitious, but it's got to be someone who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership. So who would that be and why?
Yeah, so I think firstly I'm going to caveat in this and say I don't think anyone's perfect at leadership. I think there's always like room for improvement and development. But I think for me, I would say someone like Steve Jobs. I think that ability to be really creative where it feels like what you're envisaging is not possible is actually quite inspiring for a lot of people. I personally don't have that trait. I'm a bit more of a realist than that. I've really struggled on that, like dream big, dream the impossible, because I just think, well, it's impossible. But I think that, and if you can inspire that to your teams, you can end up with really, really clever things that, you look at and you go, wow, that product is like, someone sat down and went, how do we make this? And how do we make this amazing? No idea how we do this, but let's work on that. And I think that type of leadership can be really inspiring around getting new products and ideas going. And I'm quite a creative person. So, that inspiring people to be super creative and not doubt and work towards that. And I think, again, that goes back to that probably every day what you're doing towards this problem piece that we said before. Because, when you've got the really big things, if you look at the really big thing, you go, oh my God, I can't. It's not possible. But actually, if you break it down into much, much smaller steps, I know everyone's like going about iPads, iPhones, etc. I personally feel like, they were groundbreaking products, but they were a bit of an iteration and probably were going to come with technology. The thing for me that came out the last few years with Apple, the AirTag, like for me, I just look at that and I go, oh my gosh, so this item that can have a year's battery, be tiny, and can connect to any Apple device in the world to tell it where its location is because it doesn't have a data connection itself, I just think is like incredibly amazing. I remember when the AirTags first came out, someone was like, are you going to get an AirTag? And I was like, well, what's the point? Like, unless you're right next to it, I very rarely lose stuff that I'm right next to. And they're like, no, it works by connecting to any Apple device, not even your own. And I was like, oh wow, that's like, you must sit there and go, okay, so how do we do this without exposing people's data and privacy and all this stuff? And I wanted to let the battery to last a year. I just think like there's something in that where you go, wow, okay, that's pretty impressive. You know, like where did that idea come from? Because I know if someone had said that to me, I'd be like, how are we going to do that? Like,
yeah, it's. I don't know the answer to how do we do that without exposing people's data and breaching privacy, because I'm not convinced it does. But you're right. I mean, it's a really impressive bit of kit, isn't it? And I mean, there's a local made the news here recently about there was a large collection of stolen equipment that was uncovered because one of the victims had air tagged all of it that they belonged to, and the police traced it and they found this stash of stuff that was probably like 2 or 3 years old, and that wouldn't have happened without that technology. So that's kind of cool. So I mean, Steve Jobs, he's an interesting character, or was an interesting character, wasn't he? Like, there's so much in there to admire and learn from. You know, I mean, things like resilience that we've talked about a bit today as well, like the way he bounced back from some pretty massive setbacks in his career journey and his relationship with the company that he founded and all of that sort of stuff. And then that inspirational bit, having that vision, the idea, and being quite unrelenting in the journey towards realizing that. The flip side of that being that I think made him quite challenging to work for as a leader. I think, you know, there's some well-established accounts of him being not such a nice person.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think it's about how you, and I think this is the thing around the perfection piece, isn't it? Like, no one's perfect. But I think it's about choosing some qualities that you can see. And maybe I've chosen someone because they have quite a few qualities that I don't have. Mm-hmm. You know, that like unrelenting, never give up on an idea type thing. I don't really have that. I'd love that quality, but you know, I'm too much in the detail going, oh gosh, I can't do that, can we? Just give up on that. Like, or, you know, I've had staff members come to me before with some of the stuff and I'm like, God, that's an amazing idea. Where do we even start on that? Like, oh my God, I don't even know where to start on that. I just can't even think about it. So I think maybe that's the draw of why they're admiring to me, but someone else would admire someone different because they have characteristics that they don't have. But yeah, and I also think there's a room for, you know, for every really good leader, there's a room for a second person that can balance them out, because actually nobody's perfect. And actually you need a bit of balancing out. Do you know what I mean? To make things work and make sure people are happy. But yeah, it was more around that like visionary product and resilience piece for me that I was like, wow, that's quite, you know, like dare to dream and dream big is quite impressive.
Definitely. I mean, it's a difficult one because like if he hadn't had that like unrelenting, like uncompromising belief in the idea, then obviously none of what Apple has achieved would have happened. But also, I think it's quite rare that that belief also gets justified. I think
I agree with you.
99% of the times, people who just dogmatically stick to their idea, it turns out the idea wasn't that great, or it's just not practical, and the business collapses because they won't flex and they won't adapt and they won't, you know, pivot, move to the next idea.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I guess Apple haven't just stuck to that one idea, have they?
True.
But you're right, and I'm advising a startup at the minute, and that founder is very, very stuck to that idea. I think it's going to be the next biggest thing ever. It's going to be a billionaire. And I'm like, do you know what? That may happen, but actually you really need to put some groundwork in here to, if you think that's going to happen, and you need to diversify a bit. And I personally think you need to pivot into a slightly different market. But you're right. There's still something about that characteristic that is very admirable. That kind of, this is going to work. Whereas I think I never confident enough on an idea or something to have that absolute staunch, no, we will not deviate from this. It is going to work. I can always be swayed. And, you know, there's room for both, isn't there? And that's why I think that second is really important. You know, that person that's got the idea, I will not move from this. And the other person that's given that bit of, okay, but let's just, think about this. We could do this as well to just diversify at the same time as we're working on the big thing. Can work really well.
Yeah, and you're right, of course. And I was watching an interview clip with him recently, earlier this week, actually, where, obviously he was flexible as well, because it was the way he was recounting the story of the iPad. Somebody asked him, like, was it the natural progression from the phone? He said, well, actually, no. The iPad was the first idea, but as we got a certain way down the path of developing the technology to realize it, I had this kind of light bulb moment of, actually, we could make a phone with this. And that was how the iPhone was born. So it wasn't that way around, as many people think. So he did have that ability to change his mind if there was a better idea as well. It's an interesting one. As I say, there's loads to learn from him. Yeah, and it's why he's come up a few times, unfortunately. So no bonus points for you, I'm afraid.
What a shame.
Well, Richard, this has been a really interesting conversation. We've covered some cool topics, actually, that, they're still important and meaningful in this day and age, even after all the years of COVID and everything. And there's some great leadership lessons there, some great stuff for entrepreneurs in the audience as well. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and insights. And small question to close with is, if anyone in the audience would like to learn more about you, is there a website? Is there social links?
Yeah, they can go to my website, richard-lee.co.uk. You can look me up on LinkedIn. It's the most common name out of those, so you may or may not find me in amongst the million other Richard Lees. But yeah, my website's probably best place, richard-lee.co.uk.
Lovely. Okay, well, thanks again so much.
Thanks so much. It's been great.
Yeah, really enjoyed it, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Richard, thank you again for your time today and for sharing those great stories and insights from all of that really useful experience you've had so far. Listeners and viewers, if you would like to learn more, do check that description, those show notes down below or to the left, right, or above. I don't know. It depends which platform you're on. But you'll find those links to go and visit Richard's website, learn more about him, perhaps reach out, get in touch. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. And if you are new to leadership, if you're founding your first company, if you're taking that first step up into management in the company where you work, or you're thinking of applying for such a role and you'd like to learn more about leadership, get to grips with some of the best practices and how to avoid some of the pitfalls or address some of those challenges, do come along and join us at Integrity Leaders. It's the online leadership community for leaders just like you. New managers, first-time founders, learner leaders, if you will. There's plenty of resources in there to learn from, as well as events and the opportunity to meet and learn from other leaders at the same stage or similar stage of their journey as you. The website, if you would like to learn more, is www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk, and that should be on the screen if you're watching this via video on YouTube or Spotify. As a podcast listener, you will also benefit from a 50% off discount code, which is again in the show notes and on the screen for you. And that is valid for our new leader membership tier for the duration of your membership. So it could be for life. As long as you remain a member, you will get a 50% discounted rate on your monthly membership. So come along, visit the website, learn more, hit that green button, and it will take you to the sign up page. And hopefully you can figure it out from there. But if not, please do reach out, get in touch with me. Again, there's links all over the place for how to do that. LinkedIn's probably the best though. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you'll join us again next week. And until then, be a leader, not a boss.